Hidden Stories of York Region is a Made in York Region podcast series aimed at disrupting the dominant narratives by sharing stories about lived realities, community issues, and innovative solutions across the region. Each episode features guest speakers living and or working in York Region. Our conversations tackle challenging community issues and identify solutions and actions for change. My name is Yvonne Kelly, and I will be your host for episode 4 of Hidden Stories of York Region. Affordable and accessible housing is a basic human right and is essential to the infrastructure and health of our communities. The needs and challenges are so great that we are devoting all 4 episodes of season 3 to the housing challenges in York Region. Hidden Stories of York Region acknowledges that our work takes place on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Huron-Wendat. We acknowledge that we work and play on the ancestral lands of all Indigenous peoples who have left their knowledge before us. We acknowledge those who walk the lands now and future generations to come. Hidden Stories is committed to sharing the truths, realities, and knowledge of Indigenous communities in York Region. All 3 levels of government acknowledge that Ontario is in the midst of an affordable housing crisis, which has become increasingly widespread over the past 5 decades and has only exacerbated during the pandemic. Vacancy rates in York Region are among the lowest in the country. As we build a modest amount of affordable housing, gentrification, renovictions, and rent hikes on vacant units are eliminating affordable housing units more than twice as fast as new units are built. The Centre for Equality, Rights and Accommodation, or CERA, is one of Canada's oldest not-for-profit charities working at the intersection of human rights and housing as a fundamental social and economic right. With me today is Bahar Shadpour, Director of Policy and Communications for CERA. Bahar is a communications and policy professional with over a decade of experience in nonprofit strategic communications and public affairs, government relations, and stakeholder engagement. Prior to joining CERA, she worked on housing rights and policy at the Advocacy Centre for Tenants Ontario and on the rights of women and girls at the Canadian Women's Foundation. Bahar holds a master's degree in political science and a postgraduate certificate in corporate communications and public relations. Welcome, Bahar.
Thank you, Yvonne, for inviting me.
So we'll start by looking at CERA's work. So if you could tell us a little bit about the work of CERA and why it's so important today.
So CERA has been around. It's actually our 35-year anniversary this year, and we've been working to advance the right to housing in Canada for low to moderate income families. And we do this through eviction prevention services that we provide to tenants. We do lots of education and training of tenant communities, service providers, and housing providers. And we do policy advocacy as well as research work to be able to recommend evidence-based housing policies that will create accessible, adequate, and affordable homes for people living in Canada, and in particular, we've been working really closely with communities across Ontario.
And I feel when I talk to people sometimes that there isn't a widespread awareness of the need to defend and protect people's human rights when it comes to housing and even renting and that kind of thing. Can you speak a little bit to that?
Absolutely. So let's just start with the fact that to live in an adequate, accessible, and affordable home, that's a human right. Everything starts with housing. Having stability and security in your housing allows you to live healthy lives, allows communities to be vibrant, and our economies to be healthy as well. And many residents of York Region specifically are struggling with rising housing costs and finding well-maintained homes. I think a lot of times when we discuss housing, often people refer to home ownership, but there are many households who are renters and rely on rental housing in the long term. So some people may never be able to afford a home. Some people will choose to rent their homes. So rental housing and supporting renter households needs to be as important as for government policies and solutions as it has been for home ownership across Canada. So I just wanted to speak a bit about York Region's housing situation to bring some more understanding in terms of what housing struggles people face. The average rent for rental housing in the region has increased significantly in the past decade or so, and vacancy rates are well below what's typically understood to be a healthy rate of 3 to 5%. York Region has some of the worst housing affordability in the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area, with over 50% of its renter households paying unaffordable rents. And this situation is projected to get worse because demand for rental housing is going to increase as our population grows in the next decade. All of this means that the region needs to seriously focus on increasing affordable and adequate housing.
There seems to be a lot to do, and as we talked about in the opening, it does fall with all levels of government. What can we put in place to, deal with the issue of not enough rental, but also address the needs of various populations that are really at risk?
And it really is up to our governments to prioritize the housing needs of those who are struggling the most with finding adequate and accessible homes. Um, when it comes to bidding wars, there are too many people who are competing to secure those very few affordable rental units that are available. And so we would definitely need to build purpose-built rentals that are affordable and increase non-market housing options. So what can our regional and municipal governments do to solve the affordable housing crisis? First of all, they can play a critical role in supporting renters to remain in their homes, to stabilize housing for a lot of households that are struggling to pay their rent, and to prevent evictions through various programs. Um, when it comes to housing, paying for housing, it's really hard for municipal and regional governments to fund major projects because they don't have the revenue sources that higher orders of governments have. So when it comes to federal and provincial governments, they are really instrumental in funding and providing those resources to the municipalities and regional governments. There are different, more creative ways that municipal governments can support the building of affordable housing. They can adopt inclusionary zoning, which is a policy that basically is directing developments in a way, in particularly hot markets, housing markets, in a way that will capture the value of increasing land prices and that kind of growth in the real estate market, to capture that value for public benefit, and to then reinvest that the funds that are gained through those policies, or the units that are being built to be affordable. There are other ways that they could incentivize nonprofit housing providers to build housing and operate their housing, whether it be by providing surplus lands so that which is a major cost for nonprofit housing providers and developers to build and maintain their housing, or they can provide subsidies that will just allow for these providers to remain operational. And why it's really important to have non-market housing options is because housing remains affordable for as long as possible. These units don't go back into the private market with increasing rents. They remain affordable, and oftentimes they provide lots of supports to the residents who live in those homes, whether they be seniors, people with disabilities, many single parent households, often led by women, just to name a few groups that rely in those deeply affordable housing options.
And I think what you kind of hear when advocates are advocating for more affordable, deeply affordable housing, municipal, regional, provincial, and federal governments will often defer to the other levels and say, well, we need them to do this first. And it seems to me a bit like a house of cards, like what comes first, what comes second, and how easily it can fall or just not happen if you can't get that kind of cooperation. And I think, particularly at the municipal and the regional levels, they don't have the capacity to tax at the same rate to raise the funds that are needed to do all of these support programs. That's
Exactly.
provincial. But when I think of things like the things that the municipalities can do, and this is something that York Region asked all municipalities to, over 5 years, donate 2 acres of land to a not-for-profit, which I think is a reasonable and progressive measure. Yes, land is worth a lot, so municipalities don't want to give up those pieces, but it's a way of contributing to a solution without taking money out of pocket. Also bylaws, that doesn't cost anything, but it's often about how you change mindsets, right? So whether it's demolition control or vacant homes tax, those very things that we know will help maintain and keep the affordable housing we already have, because contrary to popular opinion, we can't build our way out of this. We need more housing built, but we also need to protect what we already have.
Thanks, Yvonne. That's exactly what it is. It's not just enough to build more housing. First of all, when we are building housing, we need to think of diverse housing options, making sure that people have various options, whether it be social housing or if they need supportive housing, or maybe they want to live in the private rental market and they want to live in an affordable unit in a purpose-built rental building. So we have to create various options, but it's not just enough to build more housing. We need to preserve the affordable rental housing that already exists in the region and not lose housing units as we build new ones. And so to do this, governments need to hold landlords accountable to meet their property standard obligations. That means keeping their homes well maintained and in a good state of repair. They also need to support tenants to stay in their homes by protecting their rights and providing, rental supplements that preserve tenancies. And these are all things that the region and its associated municipalities can adopt. But we, again, as you mentioned, which level of government does what, they also need to work with the provincial government to act as well, in particular to enact stronger rent regulations to make sure that rents don't dramatically rise for new tenants. And just to add to that point as well, the preservation of our housing stock, it really comes hand in hand with reducing the extent to which housing has become out of reach for so many people because it's been turned into a speculative financial asset, what many people, often refer to as the financialization of housing. And we know that this has been driving long-term tenants out of their homes. It's leaving housing units empty. It's driving up rents beyond the reach of the people who actually need to live there, and it needs to stop. And I think our governments really need to work collaboratively together to curb that growing financialization of housing in Canada, in York Region, so that housing can be treated as a home again.
Mm-hmm. And I think, if you think back 40, 50, 60 years, your house was always your equity. You had the ability to, so it's not even so much about individual people and owning a home, and that's their retirement, that's their, what they pass on to the next generation. But what we're seeing is a proliferation of this investment piece, companies and real estate investment trusts that are set up just to turn houses into profit-making pursuits. So, how does the society, how do we reconcile housing as a social good and housing as an investment?
Hmm. Yeah, and if we start seeing housing as a fundamental human right, to really understand that everyone has the right to live in secure, adequate, and affordable homes. I think that's the starting point, and no one really disagrees with that notion. I think everyone understands how important adequate housing is to live, a healthy life and have a healthy community. Uh, and as you mentioned, housing, people have always, they buy housing, it's their main asset. But today, housing is increasingly being treated as an asset class. It's being used for the purpose of wealth accumulation as opposed to a home, by financial markets and actors. And by when I say financial actors, as you mentioned, these are large corporate landlords or real estate investment trusts who have are looking at the real estate and housing market as a way to increase their profit margins. And so what's happening in York region and the GTA, but also across the country, is that in these financialized housing markets, private interests are determining housing outcomes for people
Mhm.
without regard to their needs or their right to housing. So governments have a really critical role to play here, to ensuring that residents have access to housing, but they also have a critical role to play in disseminating information and being able to really communicate with various communities and engage with communities to understand what they need and how housing financialization is impacting people's lives. And that's kind of the work that we're doing at CERA,
Mhm.
and the work that we're doing, Yvonne, together in York region, is to not only speak to governments and recommend these policies, but also to inform the public, to engage with the communities that are impacted by housing issues, so that we can kind of work together to make sure that housing is first and most seen as a home, a social good, rather than an investment. And it's really, I think, up to all of us to work together to bring back housing to what it's meant to be, which is a home, and
Mhm.
push our governments to curb that financialization of housing, to promote community-based housing. And this can be done through a rights-based housing approach, actually.
So, Bahar, our final question really is a pointed one because we are looking to a October 24th municipal election, as is all of Ontario. How can we work with community members to really push and educate about the right to housing agenda and have an impact on folks as they're running in this fall election?
Mhm. Well, I think first and foremost, people need to really uh, understand that their actions and their beyond just voting, but just speaking to their neighbors and communities, it really makes a difference to just share ideas, share um, the issues that they're faced with, and to see which officials are have solutions that may respond to those needs, so that they're really going to the polls informed. But I think before going to the polls, this time gives us an opportunity to come together and to push our governments, speak to them, go to their meetings, town halls, ask really pointed questions in terms of how they're planning to invest public funds in affordable housing developments, to find out if they are going to support nonprofits and cooperative housing developments, and that how they're planning to enhance enforcement efforts to hold landlords accountable to meet their repair and maintenance obligations. And one last thing that I think they should be asking their officials and people running in the municipal election is, how are they planning to protect the existing affordable housing? Are they going to come up with programs, or do they have any ideas on ensuring that the lower cost rental properties that are at risk of loss can be acquired through particular municipal and regional programs? Um, I think all of this really requires, in the community level, organizing, requires a lot of information sharing, and coming together to have their voices heard during the election by voting. But I think after the election as well, there's an ample opportunity to come together, to share ideas, and be part of the decision-making process by going to municipal meetings and regional meetings and speaking up, so that those needs aren't being left to the side because the voices aren't being heard at the decision-making circles.
Bahar, I just really want to thank you so much for the time, for your expertise, and making yourself available today to talk to us about this. It was really enlightening and just very enjoyable to talk with you as always.
Thank you so much, Yvonne.
Housing as a fundamental human right is a precondition to a safe and healthy life. But in cities all around the world, having a place to live is becoming more and more difficult. The right of every woman, man, youth, and child to gain and sustain a safe and secure home and community in which to live in peace and dignity is codified in Article 25(1) of the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There is no doubt that housing is one of the greatest challenges facing York Region today. In June 2020, over 80 individuals and not-for-profit organizations in York Region came together to discuss the way forward for a just recovery from the pandemic. Recommendations included defined action items that municipal, provincial, and federal governments set as priorities if we want to build a healthy and caring society that puts people ahead of profits. Now is the time to embrace, not shy away from, bold ideas that will work to refocus our strategies on creating a just and equitable housing strategy that works for us all. Season 3 of Hidden Stories of York Region was written and produced as a collaboration between the Social Planning Council of York Region, the Hidden Stories podcast team, and the Aurora Public Library. Hidden Stories of York Region is available on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and on the social media platforms of the Social Planning Council of York Region and the Aurora Public Library. If you enjoyed this episode, please like us, share with others, and be part of the change.